of kickoff returns. Okay, let's go down to blocking below the waist. Blocking below the waist is a rule that the committee continues to experiment with. I mean, this is a very challenging situation because you've got a lot of people in the football community that believe that blocking below the waist ought to be taken out of the game completely. You got a lot of people in the football community that feel like that blocking below the waist is not as dangerous a foul as it looks, not as dangerous a play as it looks, and it ought to be allowed. So there were several changes made in the blocking below the waist rule last year. We've made some more changes this year, and I'm going to go through the situation that we had last year. The thing that was different last year compared with previous years, and this is a subtle difference, but the blocking below the waist, the default position is that blocking below the waist is illegal. And it's illegal except when it's allowed in certain cases. If you remember, up to last year, blocking below the waist was legal, but there were exceptions when it was not allowed, many exceptions, a page and a half of exceptions in the rule book. And so it made it a complicated rule. It's still a fairly complicated rule, but the default position has changed in that by default, blocking below the waist is illegal. There are circumstances where it is allowed. The exceptions to blocking below the waist, this hasn't changed. The exceptions to blocking below the waist are only before change of possession and only on scrimmage downs that don't include kicks. So if you've got a change of possession and you got blocking below the waist, that's a foul. If you've got a kicking play, any time during the down when there's a kick and you've got blocking below the waist, that's a foul. One of the new things this year is that we've outlawed what's called a peel back block. If a player is beyond the line of scrimmage and then blocks below the waist back toward his own goal line, that's a foul. That's a new rule this year. And we'll talk about the adjacent sideline and north-south blocks. But if a player on the offensive team is beyond the neutral zone and blocks below the waist back toward his own goal line, and what that means is any angle toward his goal line. So if it's any angle off the lateral back toward the own goal line, that's going to be a foul, and that's a new rule this year. Here's an example in video about blocking below the waist toward your own goal line. And what you're going to see is the player who is lined up to the left of the offensive formation in the white team is going to go downfield and then come back and block below the waist right there at about the 30-yard line. You'll see it also from the end zone shot. You kind of lose him in the end zone shot, but you can see that he goes down, comes back toward his own goal line, and that's a foul because he blocked below the waist when he was already downfield. And again, that's a safety issue. We're going to talk about players on the offensive team that are restricted from blocking below the waist and those that are not restricted. These are the players that are restricted. If a player's lined up in the backfield, he's outside the tackle box, or he's outside the frame of the tackle, the second lineman from the snapper, then he's restricted. And what that means is this: in a tight formation, you might have the tackle box is 5 yards on either side of the snapper. In a really tight formation, you might have the tight end inside the tackle box. But if a back is lined up outside the tackle box or outside the tackle, that is outside the second man from the center of the formation, then he's restricted from blocking below the waist. Linemen who are more than 7 yards from the center of the formation are restricted, like they always have been. Backs who are in motion, who are outside the tackle box anytime after the ball is ready for play, they're restricted unless they got set. If they come set inside the tackle box and then go in motion again, let's say they start in motion from outside, come inside the tackle box and get set, then they're not restricted from blocking below the waist. So that's a little bit different than it was in last year. So again, backs outside the tackle box or outside the tackle, linemen who are more than 7 yards outside from the center of the formation, and anytime a back was outside the tackle box, unless he got set again inside the tackle box. Those are the restricted players. And if a player is restricted, then they can only block below the waist in two circumstances. If a restricted player blocks below the waist along the north-south line, up and down the field, that's okay. And if they block below the waist toward their adjacent sideline, that's also okay. Now, the adjacent sideline is the sideline to the outside of them at the snap. For example, if a back is lined up, this hasn't changed from last year. If a back is lined up to the right of the formation, then the right sideline is his adjacent sideline. He's allowed to block below the waist toward that sideline, or north and south. If he's lined up to the left of the formation, regardless of where the ball is, if he's lined up to the left of the formation, then the adjacent sideline is to his left. And so if a player is restricted, then he can only block north and south, or he can block below the waist toward his adjacent sideline. The other thing that's a little bit new this year, that if a player is restricted, he cannot block below the waist inside the tackle box in any direction. So let's say that I'm a restricted player, and let's say that I'm lined up to the right of the formation. I go in motion. I'm inside the tackle box at the snap. I can't block below the waist anywhere inside the tackle box in any direction. And so, but if I'm inside the tackle box and I go in motion and never leave the tackle box, I am unrestricted. This is all a little confusing, but it's going to be easier to look at on the field than it is to talk about, really. I've got a situation where we're going to look at a player who is restricted, and you're going to see he starts outside the tackle box. He's at the right of the formation. He goes in motion, comes back inside, never stops his motion, never gets reset, and then blocks below the waist. Now that block is toward the adjacent sideline, but nevertheless it is a foul because he's restricted. He blocked below the waist inside the tackle box. If he had come in and gotten set and then blocked below the waist in that direction, he would have been okay. But this player never stopped moving, so the fact that he was in motion, was restricted, came inside the tackle box, continued his motion, he was still restricted, and so he could not block below the waist.